Hello there. Welcome to the Ebon Hawk, a podcast discussing Star Wars news and Knights of the Old Republic. Today, we are joined by the Padawans, and together we'll dive into some fun Star Wars and KOTOR discussions. This is a spoiler alert for Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. This is Ebon Hawk Padawans team up episode, and this is where the For the Republic begins.
So today we are joined by the Padawan team. Could you guys introduce yourselves and what you guys do?
I'm Oliver.
I'm Steve.
We run the Padawans podcast. We also kind of do a YouTube channel. Just really big Star Wars fans that really just wanted to talk about it on a consistent basis and go over stuff because we always had fun kind of theorizing and we were big watching YouTube videos and stuff like that after stuff would come out. So kind of how it started in my general background, I was a Star Wars fan as early as I can remember. I can't remember a certain date. I'm 32 years old now, so it's been a while. And I was kind of right in that generation that saw the originals after they came out. But we were like 12 when the prequels came out.
Yeah.
So we were big prequel fans because that was kind of when I always wanted new Star Wars, and that's when the new Star Wars came out, and obviously all the graphics were updated and it was more contemporary at that time. So I got really into it. Yep. And then was kind of obviously bummed when it just didn't sound like there would be anything going forward. And I was always I read a lot of Legends novels and stuff like that. My aunt was a big fan she had like every Legends novel ever. So I got really into those. And then I was super excited when Disney bought Star Wars just because I wanted more Star Wars. And when they said they were kind of like resetting canon, I took that as my cue to like be able to read every book that came out as it came out and kind of be as much of a canon expert as possible. Because obviously you guys know from Knights of the Old Republic, Legends can get a little murky in terms of storylines and stuff like that. Not everything was perfect and kosher. So the new canon was exciting. So would always talk about it with Steve, and we just kind of were chatting one day, and I really wanted to do a podcast or a chat. There was no real direct division at first, and I just wanted to talk Star Wars. So we kind of started to put it together, and Steve, you can take it from there. I mean, Steve really was the driver of actually the podcast part. So.
Yeah, I think. Well, fun fact that Ollie and I we've been best friends since we were about probably around the time we were watching Star Wars, 5-6 years old. So we've been friends a long time, and like he was saying, we used to, especially when we were playing video games, we used to talk about Star Wars, just like especially when the new stuff came out with the sequel trilogy, and we just would go on rants for hours on different topics of stuff, and with all the novels coming out too, and Ollie brought up the idea of doing a podcast. Initially, at first, I was actually hesitant, and then I finally was like, you know what, I'm gonna give it a shot, and that's then we started doing the podcast, and so kind of like what Hugh said, I've been a huge fan since I was about 5-6 years old. Same thing, watched the originals. I was actually a really big Phantom Menace fan. I know a lot of people hate that movie for various reasons, but I actually really love it just because it came out when we were 12, and always been a huge fan of KOTOR, played the video games, and was just really excited when Disney bought the franchise as well, just like Ollie said. So I never read the books though, the Legends books. So I just started getting into the Legends stuff. I've actually, the novels was very new to me. And because of that, I've actually, it's in terms of canon and lore and everything, I love the journey that the novels have taken me, especially in the last couple of years. So really excited to be here. And, we love doing our show on a weekly basis. So it's really cool.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think we as a team can kind of relate to like always just loving Star Wars and growing up with the prequels. And we met in high school, Coden and I, and I think like I always kind of thought about doing a podcast, but it wasn't until like last year where I was like, you know what, it would be kind of cool to share what I love about Star Wars and Knights of the Old Republic too. just like in a podcast form, and kind of share it with others. And I always love listening to the Padawans, so it's great to have you guys on board.
Yeah,
thank you.
So it'll be fun.
Question, just kind of like break the ice a little bit more with your guys. It sounds like you guys have read some of the newer canon, the Disney canon. What do you guys? How would you guys would say that the Disney canon kind of compares to the kind of the decanonized Legends canon?
Do you want me to take this, Steve? I read.
I mean, I have opinions on it, but yeah. Take it.
So I'll take a little more of the Legends stuff, just because I've read a lot. I mean, I haven't read all Legends, that's for sure, but I've read a hefty amount on that end too. I would say, I mean, for me, cohesive story is just such a big thing. So the fact that canon is, with some, minuscule exceptions, all consistent canon, whereas the expanded universe got to, or what do we call it now? Legends. I was always just calling it the expanded universe. Legends kind of went different directions and different characters. I don't think there was anything too egregious where like a main character was dead and then the next episode in someone else's book they were alive, but there were a lot of inconsistencies. So it was tough to get a through line. In terms of the canon, I do really like it. I'll say this. I actually enjoy, to me, I know the movies are always like a canon for people, you know what I mean? Like the Bible version kind of. But I've been I am a sequel trilogy fan. Let me get that clear in terms of that. I do not like them. I enjoy them, but my biggest disappointment with them is that I'm such a big canon novel and canon content with comics and stuff like that person, that I think they've built up so many interesting storylines through the TV shows, through the novels. And the sequel trilogy, I think, was just the movies were afraid to touch them. I think they were afraid to, I don't know, maybe just exclude people who didn't read the books. You know what I mean? But I thought it could have been done in better ways. But I think the novels are some of the best stuff out there, and they compare well. I mean, there's a bunch of novels written by the same people, like the new Thrawn series written by Timothy Zahn, who written the original Thrawn series. So I actually think the novels are, in my opinion, the novels are the best thing in Star Wars new canon, since Disney took over, that there is.
Yeah, I was gonna say 100%. The novels, I think, are the best part of new canon, I guess. And like I said, like Ollie was actually the one that got me into the novels once they started releasing them once Disney bought Lucasfilm. So it was just the amount of world building in these novels too, and like the consistencies, and it's the books are just, they're awesome. They just tie everything together. The littlest details you can find that you won't exactly see in the movies per se it's awesome that you can see that. So
it's cool. I haven't touched any of the new, like the Disney canon yet. I am looking forward to the Mandalorian book coming out. That sounds pretty interesting to me. But yeah, when Disney had kind of like decanonized a lot of Legends, I mean, some of it does make sense, because you're right, a lot of it is kind of out in left field and really only makes sense in the context of its own little world. But yeah, like if a lot of these were written by a lot of these guys, then I probably would check these out if I have some time.
Absolutely. I mean, I would. I mean, Ollie, you'll probably say the same thing, but the Thrawn series, the Thrawn trilogy, and anything by Claudia Gray, in my opinion, are amazing books.
It depends on what you're into. I would say the Thrawn trilogy, Tarkin, Bloodline, those three feel to me more like the writing of a lot of the expanded universe. They're a little more gritty, you know what I mean? But there's a ton of, like, Lost Stars is probably my favorite book. It's a young adult novel, but like it takes place from before the original trilogy till slightly after, and it follows two people. One goes to the Rebel Alliance, one goes to the Empire, and you just kind of see the inner workings of that. Everyone's human, you know what I mean? Which is really interesting. But if you were a big Legends fan, I mean, the Thrawn trilogy does it well because it's the same author. It's the guy who wrote Thrawn, so that's cool. And I think Tarkin's written by the same guy that did the Plagueis novel, and it has that kind of that gritty Empire, you know what I mean, a more real kind of writing. Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty out there. Obviously, I could give suggestions if you want to get into them, depending on what you're interested in. But there's a ton of good stuff.
No, I think I pretty well stick close to like the canonized timelines, so I think I know like which ones to target. But yeah, that's some good opinions. Like I haven't had the chance to really talk to people who have like really looked into them. So
I mean, I keep up with what happens in the new canon. I just haven't read them yet. Part of that is because like I was a busy student and then kind of getting jump started like in my career, but
Totally
and then just kind of like reading different things. But I grew up with a lot of the legends, and like while like they're not perfect, I mean, you could kind of, it's kind of the beauty of like, I think what Star Wars you can always do is just like kind of take what you want and incorporate what you like into your head canon, and it can make sense to you like in your head. But the new canon, I think the first one I want to dive into would probably be Dooku Jedi Lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, because I think that the prequel trilogy just didn't do enough with Dooku. And I just think he's a fascinating character. I think it would have been cool to see him like maybe on the council in Phantom Menace.
Right.
And just kind of to examine that character more, because I was just kind of like, he's like a suave fencer gentleman. He's interesting. And then I think I really want to dive into like the Mandalorian novel. I'm kind of sad they had to switch the schedule up for that one, so I think it's going to be released next year. Yeah.
October next year, which is crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I keep up with like, I at least like go to Wikipedia and just kind of look up what happens in all the books, just so I can like sound informed. So I know like, I knew before like going into the Siege of Mandalore, like some of the beats that were going to happen.
Right.
I think like one of my problems with some of like the new canon is like there's so much interesting material. Like everyone tells me the Phasma book is excellent, but then they kind of squander all these interesting characters in the movies.
Exactly. That's my biggest issue. Yeah.
So I think it would just kind of make me upset, because like Phasma could have done so much more, but it seemed like all Disney wanted to do with her was like promote Funko Pops, you know?
No, we have this conversation a lot of how the kind of drop, but I guess that was kind of the point of what I was trying to get at with the books, is that they're so good. And they create this thing, and actually their only downfall really is the movies. And I don't not like the movies. I'm just saying, like, because of stuff like that exactly how you're explaining the Phasma thing is that they built up all these storylines, and they didn't really use them, in the sequel trilogy. But if you do Dooku Lost, I would say literally pick up Master and Apprentice and read it at the same time, because it details a ton of Dooku from the other side as well. They're almost you should read them at the like back to back, not at the same time, but one after the other, because it's almost the same storyline.
That's one that I'm eyeing down, is Master and Apprentice. But the one thing that kind of held me back on that one is how much I read Jude Watson's Jedi Apprentice, and how much Qui-Gon Obi-Wan story you kind of get from that. And so I was like, I don't know if that's like a Disney retelling of what happened, or if that's...
Because I think they did a good job of some of the stuff that Disney touches on. I don't think they mess with the characters too much in stuff that Disney wasn't a part of. You know what I mean? Like, that's why a lot of the Clone Wars stuff I think is really good, because they kept that as canon, but they didn't produce that. So it was like, it was on Comedy Central or whatever. And they've done a really good job with not... As much as I don't think they Disney-fy stuff too much, like there is that complaint, but they don't really touch stuff in the Clone Wars. They leave it how it was.
Yeah, there's always just like comparing canon to Legends, there's always just a whole lot to discover, and you can like and or not like things, but like I think that's kind of the beauty of Star Wars in a way, is like you can just like kind of take what you like. Everyone has another opinion, and you can just be like, that's cool, So That's what I think Star Wars should be, at least.
It'd be in a better place if that's what we agree.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time. It's just such a bummer that some people take it to that different level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like Ollie and I, especially like we have different opinions on things too, and I'm sure we all do. But we're not like at each other's throats, like, oh, that's not right. You have to like it, or you're not a Star Wars fan. Like, there's people out there who just takes it to the next level on that stuff. It's crazy.
We'll just take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment. Republic and the Old Republic, they're kind of two different time periods, but they kind of seem to overlap in some people's minds. The Old Republic, what I would say what makes the Old Republic is it's just kind of a bit more of it feels like a part of the timeline where you have kind of more freedom. You're not as defined by the Skywalker saga, and it's kind of a bit more of a medieval period. I guess, how would you guys describe, Ollie and Steve, what do you think, like, the Old Republic or like the Knights of the Old Republic, SWTOR, like, how would you describe that era?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect way of saying it. I think it was freedom from having to worry about touching or making invalid anything that happened in the original trilogy, and I think that was a good move. Obviously, it's like you said, like it's a little bit more of medieval kind of feeling. Obviously, there's tons of Jedi, tons of dark side. There's just I think it's a fascinating era, and I think it's more fun to play in. You know what I mean? When you're creating something.
Yeah.
And I had mixed feelings about the High Republic when they said it, because I really thought the Old Republic was where they'd go. But I don't know if they felt as though the Old Republic was like the next thing that no one wanted people to touch. You know what I mean? So they kind of did like a halfway, because they were like, well, I know a lot of people aren't happy with kind of how we ended the Skywalker saga. So let's go far enough back that we can create new, but we're also, we can always go to the Old Republic in the future.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I was interested in your guys' take on it, because I do think they'll bring some stuff in. Obviously, the more that we hear, and I know it's all rumors and stuff like that, it does seem like it's quite a bit different now that we've gotten, some of the pictures and even some of like the world events that it's based around. Hopefully not invalidating anything in the Old Republic. But the High Republic seems like it's going to be smaller, where the Old Republic almost felt bigger than the Skywalker saga in terms of a universe, It just seemed like there was more going on.
Yeah.
So I'm also of that opinion that I like that they kind of chose the kind of this High Republic era, this pre Golden Age Republic time, and not try and retread something that Star Wars fans are already like very aware of. I think that from what we saw with the sequel trilogy and things like Battlefront 2, and I think that Disney will have more success telling a new story with like fresh everything, characters, like timeline events, things. I think that they'd have a better time with that to tackle, instead of, for example, kind of the topic that Cassia and I have kind of covered from one week or another of would they do a TV show or a movie series of the Old Republic, and if so, are they going to follow the cast of the Old Republic, or are they just going to use the world of the Old Republic? Instead of having to ask those kinds of questions, the High Republic is just fresh and something that they could totally capitalize on.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that, I would say it's kind of with the sequel trilogy, Disney kind of pigeonholed themselves into, they had to follow already a set cast. They had to follow everything in terms of canon moving forward. So, like what you said, Coden, that the High Republic is definitely it's a clean slate for the most part. It'll be interesting to see some of the characters that will be alive during that time, like Yoda, for instance. But it's the sequel trilogy for sure. It definitely they had less leeway with certain things, whereas the High Republic they definitely have more freedom from what it seems like. And then with KOTOR, that's just I don't know if messing with that would be a good idea or not.
And just so I'm fresh, the High Republic is roughly, they're giving it a roughly 200 years before the Phantom Menace, or maybe 200 years before A New Hope. When did KOTOR take place versus the online, the SWOTOR? Were those all in the same exact time period, or are we 1,000, 10,000 years?
Knights of the Old Republic, it's 4,000 years before
4,000.
A New Hope. And then SWOTOR takes place like 300 years after that.
Okay.
So like 3,700 years before the Battle of Yavin. And then what's interesting about the High Republic is that the rumors when it was like called Project Luminous, it was all the rumors were saying it's going to be 400 years before the Phantom Menace, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then when it was actually announced, it's like 200 years. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like just like it's kind of like almost on target, but not quite.
Yeah, I feel like they should have gone a little bit further back. I didn't want them to go Old Republic, but I feel like they may have kind of cornered themselves into a box with 200. Because in the grand scheme of things, that it seems to me to be very close. To where we are in the Phantom Menace.
I think that politically, like Coruscant, for example, is going to be in a very similar place as it was in Phantom Menace. But Yoda would be the only one that is, like, I guess like the standard pedestrian Star Wars fan would be able to place Yoda at the scene, but maybe not like any other character from the Star Wars world.
When Project Luminous was announced, I kind of hypothesized it was like our episode 17, I think, that a lot of times when you have like a golden age, and the High Republic kind of sounds like a golden age,
right?
Where like you have kind of like a Wild West and like idyllic King Arthur-esque knights. And sometimes when you have a golden age, like people and society turn prosperous. But then sometimes when you're in a prosperous state, like people kind of begin to get lazy and like corruption kind of starts to seep in. So I wonder if by like having it 200 years before the Phantom Menace, it's kind of explaining
just enough time for that. Yeah,
how they got to where they were.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I'm super excited for it. I'm excited for something new. I just hope they don't not have enough time if they're building stories that they have to stop 50 years or whatever it may be, Yeah.
I mean, you kind of want to you want to have some room for other stories to be told.
I just wanted to give them as much room as possible to stay away from anything like that way. You just don't have to worry about it, Yeah.
Because like the High Republic, when I think of that, when I read about it, it just kind of seems like, kind of like Camelot in the Wild West, very idealized. And when you look at like the King Arthur cycle, it ends in tragedy. And maybe that would be a little bit too dark for like, the High Republic, but maybe it could end like on a note where it's like you kind of know like things are gonna slide, like, because when you get to the Phantom Menace, like the Jedi Council and the Senate, you're kind of expecting like the best of the best,
right?
But the Jedi Council are kind of like cold and not warm, and even Yoda's kind of a little bit not who he was in The Empire Strikes Back, Yeah. And the Senate is like very corrupt. I mean, that's the whole point of the prequel trilogy, I think, is to show that overthrow of democracy. What is the High Republic? What does that mean to you? What are you expecting?
I mean, I'm very interested to see kind of the end game of, because again, 200 years puts us in. There's a lot of stuff in canon that's not set in stone, right? Like we don't know how old Plagueis is. We actually don't really even know. That Plagueis novel has never been. It's not canon, but it's never really been like axed out of canon. So a lot of people still take it to be true. So you're only at 200 years, depending on how long Plagueis lived in canon, and then his master, Tenebris. You could really be in a situation where one of them, or maybe Tenebris's master, is alive at that point, and they're really following the rule of two, and they're kind of in the background. And I know they said that the main antagonist in the High Republic is going to be kind of these like punk rock marauder kind of guys, which is cool. I can't for 1 second believe that there's not going to be some version of this, what the Sith are doing at some point. It may not be at first. So that's kind of my big thing. I'm super excited. I mean, I'm always been a sucker for Jedi and lots of Jedi. That's why I love the prequels. So I'm so excited about, like we talked about a little bit pre-show, like the lightsabers that they've been showing off, and this whole King Arthur's court kind of Jedi, and they're going out into to explore, you know, the unknown and stuff. That's going to be great. But I am excited to see maybe what strings the Sith are pulling, because my bet would be that main antagonist group, these like marauder space punk kind of guys, are going to be somewhat tied to the Sith, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, I like that idea where like they could be pawns of the Sith, because in the Phantom Menace, Darth Sidious revealing Darth Maul to take down the Jedi and to stop Padme and all that. That was the revelation to the Jedi that the Sith were they were still out there, that
Still around.
yeah. And so technically through the High Republic, the Sith are going to be unknown to the Jedi. Hopefully Disney like keeps that together.
Yeah.
But I would, yeah, as you're saying, I would love to see some string pulling from the Sith in this story that is outside of the knowledge of the Jedi and the Senate.
Yeah, very akin to. Did you guys read the Bane novels from Legends?
Yeah.
So very similar to that, where they actually did run into like a trio of Jedi that were exploring something, and they killed them. So I don't even need that directly, but just knowing how well they pulled off the Bane books, where there was no interaction, or the Jedi did not know of them, right? They had disappeared at that point, and how much interesting story there still is, really gives me hope for something like that.
Yeah, it would be a fun Easter egg. I kind of joked, like, it would be fun if, like, Yoda kind of appears, like, in the background, but is always kind of obstructed, so you can't totally see him.
Out of focus.
Kinda like, yeah. Kind of like in the Amazing Spider-Man comics, like, before Peter Parker met MJ, like, her face was always obscured. I'm like, maybe they could, like, pull an MJ with Yoda.
That's a good
or,
idea.
like, the future Sith. Like, maybe it's like, they're like, oh, I'm photobombing this Jedi's, holocron recording. He can't see me, but
Right.
I'm a Sith. Bye.
Or even something as subtle as the Millennium Falcon going to dock at one of the Coruscant ports in one of the prequel movies. Like in the corner of your eye, you kind of hear this of Yoda like going down the corner, but you just don't see him.
Spring chicken at like 700 at that point, though. He's probably jogging around.
That's true.
What do you think the High Republic's gonna be, Coden?
I just want to be surprised. Like I'm like staying away from a lot of the like the Screen Man expectations. I want to just see something like original, but still like lined up with the canonized timeline of events leading up to the Phantom Menace. Like if I get something like that, I'm gonna be pretty happy. I am disappointed that it's comics. I would rather animation TV show or live action, but like that's like the main thing I want, is that I just want to be surprised at this point.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there's going to be more animated Star Wars content in the future, because animation, you don't have to have a set and have people on set like during, like a pandemic. So
they've had such good success with it so far too.
It's from these wheelhouse, so
yeah. So it really wouldn't surprise me if we see like a High Republic TV show, or like I've been promoting like Baby Yoda, like a little animated, simple Baby Yoda show. I think everyone would like love that. But I mean, like we could see what happens. But if the High Republic is successful, it really would not surprise me if it's adapted into movies or TV show, animated something, even like a micro series, kind of like Galaxy of Adventures on YouTube.
Oh yeah, like, that'd be cool.
It would be cool. I love that animation style, and it's just a fun way to like kind of see.
It's a good opportunity to explore genres as well. Like Steve has talked about that, like especially in the High Republic. I don't think we ever talked about it like that, but just that Star Wars is just so open for different, not necessarily a horror movie, but like different genres of movie in the universe. So if you get away from the Skywalker saga and don't have to step on anybody's toes, maybe the High Republic's like the perfect place for that. Maybe you get kind of a Wild West, you know what I mean, kind of shooter kind of vibe. You get maybe something more Indiana Jones, almost like Solo was,
yeah.
I'm actually gonna throw something different in there. Actually, one of the things I would be more interested in too is that since it is the High Republic, in that the Jedi are everywhere, maybe showing more of like them in training in their forms of fighting and stuff like that, because I feel like the movies and even Clone Wars hasn't done it justice in showing like how they train and get from point A to point B in their journey. So like sword forms and stuff like that. That'd be really cool if they dived into more of that stuff.
I agree. Just kind of like the lifestyle of what it's like to be a resident and student at the Jedi Temple.
Yeah, as a kid growing up with Jedi Adventures and Jedi Quest, I was always just like, oh man, like I wish I were like a Jedi apprentice, like living on Coruscant, going on missions,
Right. Yeah.
I was just gonna throw in one last little thought there when we were talking about like different Star Wars genres. I downed this old Legends book called Star Wars Death Troopers, and it's supposed to be like a alien book with but like Star Wars style. And I'm like, man, I want this as a movie. This would be such an awesome.
And I think that's the opportunity, right? Like the High Republic, you can explore different stuff like that. I think they're too afraid to do now,
Yeah, like a Star Wars horror movie would be like I'm a huge fan of Alien, like something, but Star Wars like that. Oh man, I'm in.
I mean, they could make it really neat.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting to see. And I think Disney owns Fox now, and didn't they put out Aliens? So
yeah, the Alien Queen is officially the one of the Wicked Queens of Disney.
Oh yeah, one of the Disney villains.
Nice.
So it would go well. But yeah, so the Old Republic, you have a whole bunch of Sith, a whole bunch of Jedi, and it's kind of like a prequel universe, maybe even a bit heightened. There's an original trilogy story in KOTOR, and that's kind of followed through to SWTOR, even though like they kind of go a little bit more extreme in SWTOR, I would say. And then the High Republic is kind of what we were talking about, kind of just 200 years before the Phantom Menace. Are there any overlaps that you would definitely want to see comparing the KOTOR and the High Republic eras, or are there things you don't want to overlap?
I'm kind of mixed on that. I feel like the only thing I would probably want is just references to maybe the Old Republic in general. Maybe just references in terms of like, oh, in the past, like whatever the reference is. That's the only thing I would want to see. And maybe that would make KOTOR, I guess, more solidified as canon, because obviously it hasn't been like said that it's canon, and that's probably the only thing I would want. I don't know if there's anything in general that I would want to see particularly. I don't know about you, Ollie, if there's something that you'd rather see.
I think the one thing I'd like explored is actually, and this isn't like a direct tie. I don't want the exact storyline from KOTOR, but I think with the Mandalorian coming out now, I think there's and the fact that they kind of are pitching the High Republic as, you know, the Jedi and the Republic expanding and going out into the outer regions, right? And kind of colonizing hyperspace lanes and stuff like that. I'd love to see the Mandalorian story at that point, because we kind of know from I think it's really Clone Wars when you get into it. They've around that time they've only been pacifists for a little while. I mean, they don't give it a timeline, but they were much more their warrior ways in the relative rememberable past in the Clone Wars cartoon show. So that'd be really neat if there's a struggle there with the Republic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe not to the degree of, you know, the KOTOR kind of stuff, or before KOTOR, I think is when it all goes down, right? But yeah, I think that'd be neat. I think people love Mandalorians. You're getting a Mandalorian series that's doing really well. So if you can kind of continue on to it in a different era, I think that'd be really neat.
One thing that I wanted to add to that too is just some like references to maybe some planets that were brought up in KOTOR. For example, Terrace being glassed. Like, what was what was like the aftermath of Terrace? Did they try and repair, you know, like, is atmosphere repair a thing? Did they try and like re-terraform Terrace to get it habitable again? Did they just let it be a trash rock at that point? Like, what, you know, like little things.
So, fun story, actually. I think one of the senators who's a member of the rebellion, Rogue One, she's supposed to be from Terrace. And the way they describe Terrace is like it's a polluted world that kind of had a catastrophe. And like they say some people live like in shipping containers, and then some people live in like the remaining skyscrapers. So I think that like Terrace has been named. But
yeah, they actually have I just reread the Aftermath series because I was going back through that, which takes place kind of in that gap after Return of the Jedi to when the Mandalorian is now. And it has like these weird little kind of chapters that have nothing to do with the actual storyline, that just kind of put you in different places in the universe, and they tell like a mini story. And they go to Terrace once or twice, and it is described very much like you just said, that a disaster happened at some unknown time in the past, and there are still like kind of the corpses of skyscrapers, and then there's just this polluted, like overgrown swamp jungle kind of thing that some people live in. So it's very much they don't get into detail of what happened, but it is very much a ruined planet that life has come back to, because I don't think it's quite like just molten or anything like that, but it's not in a pretty spot.
Yeah, so like little details like that is like really cool and really adds depth to a story. And so I would love to see like little bits like that tie in Old Republic to High Republic.
Yeah, because I think like the Old Republic and the High Republic have similarities, but I think you can kind of let the High Republic be its own thing. It doesn't have to be defined by the KOTOR era or even like the Skywalker era. Just like let the eras kind of just like be their own thing, you know? And yeah. I wouldn't be opposed to Disney retelling Knights of the Old Republic. I would just want them to do it in the right way. And like week to week, Coden and I in our podcast, we're just always kind of just trying to crack, like, if there were to be a KOTOR adaptation, like, how would you tell it? So I think it can be done. It just would maybe need to be in the right way. Maybe fans just need some breathing time after the sequel trilogy, but I think it's a rich story. And I mean, if you look at the Harry Potter movies or like great adaptations, like film adaptations of books, or like even the Marvel comics, like they're taking those well-known stories and creating good movies with them. So I think the sequel trilogy, maybe what could have made those films better, like for more people, is like they went in with a beginning, middle, and end, and like kind of characters like whose arcs they kind of knew where they were going the whole time. And I think with like Knights of the Old Republic, you kind of have that. You kind of have these characters, and maybe some people have like different interpretations of those characters, but you have kind of like a story. And because I just love stories so much, I think if you just tell a story well, like people come around to a good story being told, like even if it like doesn't quite go the way they
want it.
think, you know, but maybe that's overly hopeful and optimistic of me. So.
I hope if they do it that they don't change as much as all the fans would, the real fans would know. I hope they don't try to mess with the big surprise of Revan. That would be my biggest, like, I don't need that rewritten creatively. It's already like the greatest thing. And as much as I would know it's coming, I would please don't mess with that, because that is the essence of the whole story to me.
That's something I'm very adamant about. Like some people are like, start with like a trilogy and then the second one, like you see what happens to Revan. I was like, no, like there's so many people out there who don't even know which Star Wars is the first one. Like Disney doesn't
People would
need
love
to,
that. Yep.
Disney wouldn't need to hide the twist. Like it's usually just going to be fans and like writers of clickbait articles that are like going to know about that, you know, the twist.
Right.
And there's so many people out there who don't know if like number 4 is number 4 or number 1, and it's like, does this take place before Han Solo meets Luke?
Right.
Like I don't even know, you know, like so like I think I don't know. I'm just overly hopeful and optimistic that KOTOR would be a great trilogy or Disney Plus.
I could almost reverse psychology it and like say that the twist isn't going to be the same and just write the same twist. And then all the people who know it's coming are so worried that they're going to screw it up.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on to the Padawan's theory on Moff Gideon, we're just going to take a quick break. All right. So I hear you guys have a really great theory on Moff Gideon's possible connection to Palpatine in the First Order. Can you tell us about that?
Basically, when the Rise of Skywalker novel came out, I started thinking about it. And obviously, we were deep into the Mandalorian TV show, so we were kind of doing a bunch of different, we didn't really theory craft, but just trying to explore everything that was available. And I remember always, after the series ended, I still was kind of like, there's something more here with the Baby Yoda, especially with the whole, like when they did capture him for a little while, and the scientist said he got the DNA, and the whole thing with I don't know how into the show you guys are, but like the scientist that is testing the Baby Yoda when they get him has a patch on his sleeve, and it's the same patch that all the scientists at Camino were wearing. So I always thought that was like too much of a coincidence just for them to be like, hey, what's a cool science thing? Like they haven't done a good job to me in putting Easter eggs that mean nothing just to make make people happy. For me to believe that was just thrown in there for no reason, just to be like, hey, I wonder who'll notice this. Especially since Filoni and Favreau are doing it. And I know Filoni's way more about that stuff and connections from watching Clone Wars and Rebels. So I was always kind of on edge, like there's something more here. And so I don't want to get too much in the weeds and go crazy, but basically my theory is this: when the novel came out of The Rise of Skywalker, there was way more detail, like normal. And one of the things that caught my eye was General Pryde in the movie. I always felt like the way he talked to Palpatine in the movie made it sound like he kind of knew the whole time. And the book basically fully backs this up, that Pryde was one of the few, maybe the only, I mean, it's not detailed in terms of the exact way that Palpatine did it, but in the book, there's a couple passages detail that Pride knew about Palpatine, even when Supreme Leader Snoke was like around. So he didn't contact him a ton, but he knew the whole time kind of that the Final Order was a thing and that this was being built up. So because of Palpatine's history and basically planning everything out 1,000 years ahead of time, it seems like, and being like 2 steps ahead of everyone. In the book, it details a little bit more about his death too, that he was building basically Exegol, and it wasn't ready yet when he got thrown off into the Death Star pit in Return of the Jedi, but he transferred his essence, much like Bane tried to do in the Bane novels. And so it kind of details that it worked. In other words, he got his consciousness to this vessel, but it was incomplete. Like the vessel wasn't able to hold him for long. So my theory is that when Palpatine did this, he had in Aftermath, they had a contingency plan. So Palpatine had this whole thing planned out with basically burning down the Empire if he ever was to die and moving them to the outer regions to start the First Order. So my theory was just that he always knew that there was going to be the Final Order too, and General Pride kind of leads to that there were people right from the beginning that knew he survived, if you want to call it surviving, and was still out there building this thing beyond the First Order. And so that combined with his whole fascination in getting a clone that could hold his essence and hold his power, because the ones that he was using were basically deforming, that Moff Gideon is actually one of his original agents, and that Moff Gideon is not acting on his own accord to go after the Baby Yoda. He's very specifically acting under Palpatine's guide to find whether it's specifically Yoda's species or he's just out there finding anything related to extra force sensitivity so that they can study it to hopefully clone a body that can hold Palpatine's essence. So I think this whole thing with Gideon is actually tied into Palpatine's Final Order and Palpatine being revived, basically.
Well, that's a pretty cool theory.
It's a little more convoluted than that. I have a lot of other things that go into it, but it gets a little messy. I tried to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because, I mean, there are a lot of sources that talk about what happens after the Empire and how it transitions to the First Order. I have a hard time with the Final Order and Palpatine's existence in general, but like I like the contingency. Like, you know, just the burn down the Empire, start the First Order, that makes sense, but not like the have the First Order then like be the middle ground to the Final Order. But I like that detail that you picked up of the guy kind of, well, being a scientist from Camino. Like that just raised another question, like the Cameronians like allow these outside researchers to come in and like learn their craft, you know, because that's basically like that was like their trade, their craft for the longest time. And we know that the Empire goes in and wrecks the place at the formation of the Empire, but we don't know what else happens to Camino at that point. So
Right.
yeah, like that's some really good pickouts from the Mandalorian.
Just the simple nature of like the Kaminoans obviously have something to do. Palpatine set that whole thing up originally, right? He knows all about it. And then the fact that he's constantly, for the entire time that the Empire is around, he's constantly researching stuff for him to essence transfer if he ever was to die, and trying to learn from what Plagueis had taught him, and if there was more to learn. So I just feel like it adds up. A lot of these things add up and they never come to fruition. I don't know that they wrote it originally. Don't get me wrong. I strongly don't think this was the plan, but I think it's a very interesting way of going about connecting it to make it seem really deep.
Yeah. I mean, the Sith, like, their number one fear is death. Because the Sith, it's all about them and kind of being selfish. And the Jedi are more about being selfless, or at least that's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jedi kind of found, like Qui-Gon, kind of found out the way to transcend death, and that's kind of the Sith's ultimate goal, but they can't achieve it because they're like aligned with the dark side of the Force. So that's their number one fear, is dying. So it really would make sense. Like, Palpatine does not want to die, and he's just gonna try anything. Like, if it's Sith magic or science or something else we don't know about, like, he's gonna try to not die, and it would just be interesting if, like, one of Palpatine's evil plans, like maybe evil plan O, like after all the other letters, is like try to be an evil Yoda, like maybe he's like, I fought Yoda, Yoda was, very powerful. What if I went into like a little Yoda, like essence transferred into a Yoda creature,
Right. Could it harness the power of the dark side? Yeah.
Could it harness the power?
Yeah, we don't even know their species or anything at this point either, so that's also interesting.
Yeah, and who knows, like, if it'll be revealed in The Mandalorian, or like it'll be whispered into Mandalorian's ear and we don't hear it, but he hears it, like, just to kind of mess with people. And it's like, I just want to know, like,
wasn't that one of the things that George Lucas said, that he was like, I don't want to, like, he was never going to reveal the species?
That wasn't untouchable,
yeah.
But
maybe
we'll
just go there. I don't know. But yeah, just like, what if like Mandalorian has to save baby Yoda from like becoming an evil Yoda, but not really an evil Yoda, like a reborn Palpatine or something.
He turns red.
Oh my goodness, like
he becomes evil.
That would be like on par with like baby Yoda being possessed. Like, oh my gosh, like I don't know if we're ready for that to ever happen. But
Eddie carries a switch knife lightsaber like Rey.
I hope that they would have it written by George, what the alien species name, because that's like a no-win situation. It's always been hidden. It's always been called Yoda species. There's no name that you can possibly come up with that everyone's not going to go, so it better be like, no, George told me this is what it was, because nobody will accept whatever name you come up with if you just make it up.
Its name is Stu John. Is where Kenobi is born. And I kind of just joke, like, I want to see the planet Stu John in the Kenobi series, and everyone's like, really? And I'm like, yeah,
That'd be
like,
cool.
When else are we going to see it?
It's gotta mention.
Yeah, because a lot of people always thought that Yoda's species was called the Wills. And like, I thought that for a long time, but then they're like, nope. And then Clone Wars, it was revealed like the Wills are just kind of like super powerful Force entities that you kind of see. So there's always just these mysteries, and that's kind of something that's fun about stories, but also like, I'd like to see mysteries answered. But so it's kind of like a circle. It's like you want to close the circle, but you kind of want to have the circle like have that possibility,
That's like the essence of Star Wars right there. Everything is a mystery, and it's a never-ending circle. That's pretty much all it is.
Yeah, it's like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. But yeah, if it's going to be revealed anywhere, like, I want it to be from George, and George seems to be involved. And
he's close with Filoni, so that's the hope that I would have.
So I think that would be a good thing. Thank you for listening to the Ebb and Hawk podcast. And where can our listeners find you, Ollie and Steve?
They can find us we're on Instagram. We're also on podcast services. So Spotify, Anchor, iTunes, all the same ones that you guys are actually on too.
Oh, awesome.
So any of those. And then we also have a YouTube and a Twitch channel. Our podcast, we usually stream live, and then we have videos on YouTube as well. So they can find us there.
You can find us on Instagram at Ebb and Hawk Podcast, and the Ebb and Hawk can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, and everywhere else that Anchor Podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out. And ebbenhawkpodcast@gmail.com is our email, and you're welcome to email us your questions and business inquiries.
And this has been Coden. You can find me hanging around Instagram, just searching Coden Bond. You can also find me live on twitch.tv/ConanBond. Just keep an eye out on Twitter at the same handle to find out the exact times. Typically, though, Thursday nights. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman, and he can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/Alistair Sounds. And our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com. This has been the Ebon Hawk Padawans Team Up episode. May the Force be with you. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.